Story number 1. Shadow in the rain. The rain had been relentless all night, a ceaseless drumbeat against the windows of my small apartment in Tokyo. I had always found solace in the rhythm of the storm, a natural white noise that masked the chaos of the city below. But tonight felt different. There was an unease in the air, a tension that seemed to seep into every corner of my home. I was alone, as I often was during these long nights. My husband had been traveling for work, leaving me to navigate the solitude of our cozy, yet cramped, living space. The flickering streetlights cast eerie shadows through the rain-streaked windows, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. I wrapped myself in a blanket, sipping tea as I tried to lose myself in the pages of a novel. But my mind kept drifting, restless and unsettled. Around midnight, a loud crash jolted me from my reverie. It sounded like something had been thrown against the front window. My heart raced as I glanced up, the teacup trembling slightly in my hands. I dismissed it at first. Perhaps a branch had fallen during the storm. But as the minutes passed, the sound repeated, more deliberate this time. Probably just the wind, I muttered to myself, attempting to shake off the growing anxiety. Yet, a nagging feeling of being watched refused to leave me. I tried to focus on my book again, but the oppressive silence only heightened my sense of dread. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadowy figure standing outside my window. It was barely discernible, blurred by the heavy rain, but unmistakably human in shape. My breath caught in my throat as I stared. Unable to tear my eyes away, the figure remained still, his presence unnerving in the dark. Stormy night. I blinked, hoping to dispel the apparition. But when I looked again, the man was gone. Shaking, I stood up, the blanket slipping from my shoulders as I approached the window. My hands trembled as I wiped away the condensation, trying to get a clear view of the outside. The street was empty. The only movement the relentless downpour and the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the night. Just my imagination, I whispered, though the fear in my voice betrayed my uncertainty. I turned back to the living room, attempting to regain my composure, when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Wet footprints leading from the window to the hallway and then to my bedroom. My mind raced. How could there be footprints inside the apartment? The doors were all locked, and there was no sign of forced entry. Panic surged through me as I followed the trail, each step echoing ominously in the silent house. The footprints were deep, the mud from outside clinging stubbornly to the soles, leading directly to my bedroom door. With a trembling hand, I reached for the doorknob, my heart pounding in my chest. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to flee, but curiosity and fear held me in place. Slowly, I turned the knob and pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. The room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, filtering through the rain-soaked window. As my eyes adjusted to the dimness, I noticed the window slightly ajar. Despite my best efforts to secure it earlier, the curtains fluttered gently, moved by a draft I hadn't felt before. My gaze shifted to the bed, where a single wet footprint sat on the sheet, directly opposite the window. My pulse quickened as I realized the figure had moved inside. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered me, thick and suffocating. I stepped further into the room, the floor cold beneath my bare feet. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with an unspoken menace that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, the temperature seemed to drop, the air turning icy cold. My breath became visible, misting in front of me as I scanned the room for any sign of movement. That's when I heard it, a faint, desperate whisper, barely audible over the sound of the rain. "Help me!" I froze, every nerve on high alert. The voice was haunting, filled with anguish and fear. It sent shivers down my spine, making me question my sanity. I turned back towards the window, the shadows dancing on the walls as the storm raged outside. Without warning, the room plunged into darkness as the power flickered and died. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone, the screen unresponsive. I was alone, trapped in a house that now felt more like a prison. The whisper returned, louder this time, echoing through the room. "Please help." I stumbled towards the window, desperate to find answers. My flashlight lay forgotten on the floor, the beam now useless in the complete darkness. I pressed my face against the glass, trying to peer into the storm, but the heavy rain obscured everything. The footprints had stopped at the window, as if the figure had vanished into thin air. Tears welled up in my eyes, a mix of fear and frustration overwhelming me. I had no idea what was happening, no idea who or what was watching me. The silence stretched on, the only sound the relentless patter of rain against the glass. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, each second dragging me deeper into a state of helplessness. Just as I was about to lose hope, a faint light appeared at the far end of the room, where the bed stood. My heart raced as I approached, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. There, standing in the center of the room, was the figure, a man, his presence both terrifying and sorrowful. His face was obscured by shadows, but his eyes shone with a desperate plea. He reached out towards me, his movements slow and deliberate, as if trying to communicate. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" The man remained silent, his gaze never wavering. I took a step closer, trying to understand, but he recoiled, backing away into the darkness. The room seemed to constrict around us, the walls closing in as the whispers turned into mournful cries. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the room like a gunshot. I spun around, my eyes darting back to the window, only to see the figure vanish into the night. The power surged back on, flooding the room with harsh light. The footprints were gone, as if they had never existed. I collapsed onto the bed, my body shaking with fear and exhaustion. The storm outside had begun to subside, the rain tapering off to a light drizzle. I sat there, struggling to make sense of the night's events. The lines between reality and nightmare blurred beyond recognition. In the days that followed, I sought answers, reaching out to friends and family, but no one could provide any explanation. Some suggested it was a ghost, a restless spirit trapped in my home. Others believed it was a hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. But deep down, I knew it was something more, something that defied explanation and challenged my understanding of the world. I moved out shortly after, unable to bear the haunting memories and the fear that lingered in the corners of my mind. The house stood empty for years, a silent witness to the night I faced the unknown. Occasionally, I passed by on trips back to Tokyo, the sight of the house sending a chill down my spine, reminding me of the shadows that lingered in the rain. Sometimes, when a storm rolls in and the rain pounds against my windows, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the darkness, staring back at me with those same desperate eyes. It's a haunting reminder that some encounters leave an indelible mark, a story that remains unfinished, a soul that still yearns for help. The night I spent in that house taught me to respect the mysteries that lie hidden in the shadows, to acknowledge that the world is filled with unseen forces that watch and wait. And while I can never fully understand what happened that stormy night, I carry the memory with me, a testament to the thin veil between our reality and the unknown, where shadows dance in the rain, waiting to be seen. Story number 2. The abandoned house. I've always been drawn to the unknown, the places where stories linger and shadows hold secrets. So when a heavy downpour hit our town of Millfield one summer evening in 2018, my friends and I saw it as the perfect opportunity for an adventure. We were 5 college students, Jake, Emily, Mia, Tom, and me, seeking shelter from the relentless rain. Our destination, the old Whitaker house, an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, shrouded in local legends and whispered fears. The Whitaker house had stood empty for decades, its grandeur now faded and overtaken by nature's relentless reclamation. Locals spoke of strange noises, unexplained sightings, and an aura of unease that surrounded the property. Some even claimed the house was cursed, a place where the past refused to stay buried. Naturally, these tales only fueled our curiosity. As we approached the house, the storm intensified, rain hammering against the windows and the wind howling through the broken panes. The mansion loomed before us, its once majestic facade now crumbling, vines creeping up the walls like fingers reaching for salvation. The heavy wooden door stood ajar, inviting us into the darkness within. "Are we really doing this?" Mia asked, her voice wavering between excitement and apprehension. Jake, always the brave one, pushed the door open wider. "Come on, don't be such a scaredy cat. It's just an old house." We stepped inside, the door creaking ominously behind us. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew, each breath feeling like inhaling history itself. Flashlights in hand, we began to explore, the beams cutting through the darkness to reveal remnants of a bygone era. Faded wallpaper, broken furniture, and shattered glass scattered across the floor. The first floor was eerily silent, save for the occasional drip of water from a leaky roof. We moved cautiously, our footsteps echoing through the vast, empty halls. As we ascended the grand staircase, the sound of the storm outside seemed to fade, replaced by an oppressive silence that weighed heavily on our hearts. "Did you hear that?" Tom whispered, stopping abruptly. We froze, listening intently. It was a faint sound, like footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably human. My pulse quickened as I glanced around, trying to locate the source. "Probably just the wind," Jake said, though his voice lacked conviction. But the footsteps persisted, growing louder and more distinct as we continued upstairs. They led us to a long corridor lined with closed doors. Emily, always the most curious, nudged me. "We should check it out." Reluctantly, I nodded. We approached the first door, pushing it open to reveal a dimly lit bedroom. Nothing but an old bed and a broken window greeted us. But then, I noticed something unsettling. The floor was damp, and wet footprints led from the window towards the far end of the room. "Guys, look at this," Emily said, pointing to the trail of footprints that seemed to lead towards us. A chill ran down my spine as I followed the footprints, my mind racing with possibilities. Someone had been here recently. Despite the house's abandonment, we exchanged nervous glances, the reality of our situation sinking in. "Let's keep moving," I suggested, trying to maintain our composure. As we navigated the corridor, the sounds grew louder, footsteps now accompanied by the unmistakable sound of dripping water. We reached the end of the hallway, where another door stood open, revealing an empty bathroom. The faucet was running, water pooling on the cracked tiles. The footprints led directly into the room, circling us like silent specters. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us, plunging the room into darkness as the lights flickered and died. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my flashlight, finally managing to restore its beam. The room was empty, save for the wet footprints that now formed a circle around us, leading back towards the door. "Something's not right here," Jake muttered, his bravado slipping away. "We need to get out of here." But as we turned to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed through the house once more, this time from the second floor. We froze, terror gripping our hearts. "Did you hear that?" Mia whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I nodded, unable to speak. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped directly above us. Silence enveloped the house, the only sound our ragged breathing and the relentless storm outside. Summoning every ounce of courage, I motioned for the others to follow me. We raced down the hallway, the door to the second floor now standing firmly closed behind us. As we burst through the front door, the storm seemed to intensify, the rain lashing against us as if trying to force us back inside. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of our cars, hearts pounding and minds reeling from the night's events. As we drove away, The Whitaker house stood ominously behind us, its windows like empty eyes watching us leave. The next day, shaken and seeking answers, we delved into the house's history. The Whitaker family had lived there in the early 1900s, their lives cut short by a tragic accident. The husband had been a wealthy businessman, the wife a devoted mother, and their only child had disappeared one stormy night, never to be found. Rumors of foul play and supernatural retribution swirled around the case, but no definitive answers were ever uncovered. Determined to make sense of what we had experienced, I reached out to a local historian, Mrs. Tanaka, who had extensively researched the Whitaker family. She listened intently as I recounted our ordeal, her expression thoughtful. "It's possible that the spirits of the Whitaker family are still lingering here," she explained. "Their tragic loss could have bound them to this house, unable to move on. The footsteps and wet footprints you found might be attempts to reach out or seek closure." The realization hit me hard. We weren't dealing with a mere ghost story. There was a tangible presence in that house, a manifestation of unresolved grief and loss. The wet footprints were more than just signs of recent activity. They were symbols of the family's lingering sorrow, a desperate attempt to reconnect with the living world. That night, couldn't sleep, the images of the house and the mysterious footprints haunting my thoughts. I decided to return to the Whitaker house, armed with knowledge and a sense of purpose. Perhaps by acknowledging their pain and offering a form of closure, we could help the restless spirits find peace. As dusk settled, I made my way back to the abandoned mansion, the storm clouds threatening to unleash another bout of rain. The house stood silent, the shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon. I approached cautiously, flashlight in hand, and began to retrace our steps. The first floor was as we had left it, but the air felt different, lighter, yet still heavy with the presence of unseen eyes. I climbed the grand staircase once more, my heart steady despite the fear that lingered. Reaching the second floor, I followed the path of the wet footprints, now fading but still visible under the dim light. I entered the bathroom, the faucet still running, water pooling on the floor. Taking a deep breath, I spoke softly. "If you're still here, I'm sorry for intruding. I'm here to help." Silence answered me, the only sound the gentle dripping of water. I knelt beside the pool of water, the cool liquid reflecting the dim light. "I know you're suffering. Let me help you find peace." As I sat there, the temperature in the room began to drop, a chill enveloping me. The air grew thick with sorrow and longing, the presence of the spirits almost tangible. I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder, and I turned to see the faint outline of the family, the father, the mother, and the missing child all standing before me, their expressions a mix of sadness and hope. "We're trapped," the mother whispered, her voice echoing through the room. "We can't leave until our child is found." Determined to help, I promised them I would do everything in my power to uncover the truth and bring closure to their tragic story. Over the following weeks, I worked tirelessly, uncovering old records, interviewing locals, and piecing together the fragments of the Whitaker family's history. It was a painstaking process, but the more I learned, the clearer the picture became. The missing child had never been found, his disappearance shrouded in mystery and speculation. Some believed he had wandered off, lost in the vast wilderness. Others whispered darker theories, hinting at foul play and supernatural involvement, but without concrete evidence. The truth remained elusive. One evening, as I sat in my study surrounded by old newspapers and photographs, a realization dawned on me. The key to unlocking the spirit's torment lay in finding the missing child and ensuring his story was told. Only then could the Whitaker family find the closure they so desperately sought. I contacted Mrs. Tanaka once more, sharing my findings and formulating a plan. Together, we organized a search party, revisiting the areas where the child had last been seen. The work was grueling, navigating through dense forests and treacherous terrain. But the determination to help the restless spirits kept us going. Days turned into weeks, and our search yielded little until one cold morning. Hidden beneath a thick blanket of snow, we discovered the remains of a small campsite. Long forgotten, among the debris, we found a tattered journal, its pages yellowed and fragile. The entries detailed the child's thoughts and fears, the days leading up to his disappearance, and hints of his final moments spent wandering the forest, searching for his parents. The discovery was bittersweet, providing the closure needed to lay the spirits to rest. I returned to the Whitaker house with the journal, the weight of history and sorrow heavy on my shoulders. As I approached the house, the storm clouds parted, revealing a clear night sky adorned with a tapestry of stars. I entered the house one last time, the air feeling lighter, the oppressive presence dissipating. I placed the journal on the bed, the final piece of their story now shared with the world. A sense of peace washed over me as I spoke softly. Your story is heard, and your pain is acknowledged. You can finally find peace. The room remained silent, the spirits having found their closure. The wet footprints had faded, replaced by an enduring sense of calm. I left the house, knowing that some places hold stories that transcend time, and that even in the darkest of nights, there is hope for redemption and peace. Years have passed since that summer night, and the Whitaker house stands silent once more, its dark history now part of the town's collective memory. My friends and I have long since moved on, but the lessons learned remain etched in our hearts. Respect the past, honor the lost, and never underestimate the power of unresolved sorrow. Sometimes, when a storm rolls in and the rain pounds against my windows, I catch a glimpse of shadows dancing in the dark, silent reminders of the night we faced the unknown and helped the restless find their peace. The forest continues to stand tall, guarding its secrets, while the whispers of the past linger on, echoing through the trees and reminding us that every story deserves to be heard. Story number 3. Midnight door knock. The storm had been raging for hours, a relentless symphony of thunder and lightning that seemed to shake the very foundations of our home. My wife, Anna, and I were huddled together in the living room, trying to find comfort in each other's presence as the wind howled outside. We had always loved the raw power of a good storm, but tonight felt different, unnervingly different. It was around midnight when the first knock echoed through the house, sharp and insistent, like fingers rapping against wood in a desperate plea. Anna looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Probably just the wind," she whispered, though her voice trembled slightly. I nodded, convincing myself that she was right, but the unease settled deep in my bones. The knocking continued, each strike more forceful than the last, until it seemed to reverberate through every room. I stood up, heart pounding, and made my way to the front door, Anna following closely behind me. As I reached for the doorknob, another loud knock sent a shiver down my spine. I took a deep breath and opened the door, expecting to see a frantic neighbor seeking shelter or perhaps a lost traveler in need. Instead, there was nothing but darkness, the storm obscuring any figure that might have been there moments before. Hanging on the door hook was a torn raincoat, soaked through and dripping with water, swaying slightly in the gusts of wind. "Did you see that?" Anna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, stepping outside to inspect the raincoat more closely. It was old, the fabric frayed and stained, no indication of ownership. I turned back to Anna, trying to mask my unease. "Looks like someone left their coat," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. We closed the door, but the knocking didn't stop. Instead, it seemed to intensify, pounding on the door with a rhythm that was almost frantic. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe a car broke down nearby, or someone's been caught in the storm. I decided to check the back door, hoping to find an explanation. As I approached the back entrance, another knock, this time on the sliding glass door, echoed through the house. I glanced over my shoulder to see Anna watching me, her expression a mix of fear and worry. Steeling myself, I pulled the door open, revealing nothing but the raging storm outside. The raincoat from the front door was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Confusion settled over me. Where did it go? I muttered, turning back to Anna. She looked equally perplexed, the fear in her eyes now undeniable. We decided to investigate further, searching the perimeter of the house for any sign of the mysterious raincoat or its owner. The yard was empty, the storm making visibility nearly impossible. As we moved through the drenched grass, Anna pointed to a series of deep, wet footprints leading from the front door to the living room window. "Look at these," she said, her voice trembling. "They lead inside the house." My heart raced as I followed the trail, the footprints unmistakably large, their depth suggesting something or someone had been here recently. We exchanged a glance, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "Someone's been inside," I said, a chill running down my spine. We returned to the living room, the footprints ending at the base of the large windows overlooking our backyard. I approached cautiously, shining my flashlight towards the spot where the footprints stopped. There was no one there, only the remnants of our shattered peace and the relentless storm outside. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the upstairs hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of something or someone moving through our home. Anna grabbed my arm, her knuckles white with fear. "We need to leave," she urged, pulling me towards the back door. But as we reached the door, another knocking sound resonated from the front, this time accompanied by a soft, eerie whisper that seemed to come from the very walls of the house. "Help me!" Panic surged through me as I realized we weren't dealing with a simple intruder. Something was deeply wrong, something beyond our understanding. I glanced back towards the living room, half expecting to see the figure that left the raincoat. But the room was empty, the storm outside masking any signs of movement. Determined to protect our home and ourselves, I grabbed Anna's hand and made a swift decision to leave. We hurried through the storm, rain pelting our faces as we drove away, the house shrinking in our rearview mirror. But even as we sped down the wet roads, the sense of being watched lingered, an invisible presence that clung to us like the rain itself. The next morning, exhausted and drenched, we returned to the house, hoping to find some explanation for the night's terrifying events. As the storm had passed, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a pale light on the soggy ground. To our horror, we discovered that the footprints had vanished without a trace, as if they had never been there. The front door was still locked, the window intact, and the raincoat nowhere to be found. We contacted the local authorities, reporting the mysterious events, but they found nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. It was as if the night's occurrences were nothing more than figments of our imagination, born from the fear and the storm. But deep down, we knew the truth. Something had been here that night, something that defied explanation. The whispers echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder that we were not alone in our home. I couldn't shake the feeling that the raincoat, the footprints, and the mysterious knocks were signs of a restless spirit, seeking help or perhaps revenge for some forgotten wrong. Weeks passed, and the memory of that night faded, replaced by the mundane routines of daily life. Yet, the unease never fully left us. Every time the wind howled or the rain pounded against our windows, we were reminded of the shadowy presence that had invaded our sanctuary. Sleep became elusive, haunted by dreams of knocking doors and shadowy figures lurking just beyond the glass. One evening, nearly a year after the incident, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Armed with a recording device and a flashlight, I returned to the house, determined to uncover the truth. The memory of that night fueled my resolve, a need to understand what had tormented us and to finally put an end to the haunting. As I entered the living room, the air felt heavy, the silence almost suffocating. I set up the recording device, hoping to capture any residual energy or spirits that lingered. Hours passed with nothing but the occasional drip of water from a leaky ceiling, until the clock struck midnight. The familiar sound of knocking echoed through the house, louder and more insistent than before. My heart pounded as I approached the front door, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. I opened the door cautiously, half expecting to find nothing, but instead, I was met with an overwhelming chill and the sight of the torn raincoat hanging once again on the door hook. Confusion and fear gripped me as I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A single, damp footprint leading from the door to the center of the living room. My blood ran cold as I followed the trail, the footprint disappearing at the foot of the couch. Suddenly, the room was plunged into darkness as the lights flickered and died. The storm had returned, its fury now contained within the walls of our home. I heard the soft whisper again, clearer this time. "Help me." I turned to see a faint, ghostly figure standing at the far end of the room, the raincoat draped over its shoulders, the same torn fabric now glowing faintly in the dark. Its eyes, once a deep amber, now shimmered with a sorrowful light, reflecting the storm's rage. Translate. Story number 4. The Fair to the Forgotten. The monsoon rains in Mumbai have a way of seeping into every crevice, turning bustling streets into rivers and silencing the cacophony of the city under a relentless downpour. It was late November 2015, and the air was thick with the scent of wet asphalt and blooming jasmine from the nearby gardens. As a taxi driver, I was no stranger to these nights, but this one felt different, charged with an unspoken tension that prickled at the edges of my consciousness. My name is Rajesh Kumar, and I've been driving a taxi in Mumbai for over 15 years. I've seen it all: late-night revelers, weary office workers, desperate mothers chasing after children lost in the maze of streets. But nothing could have prepared me for the passenger who slipped into my backseat that night. It was around midnight when the call came in. The client was vague, just an address near an old cemetery on the outskirts of the city. The rain was coming down harder now, each drop pounding against the windshield like 1,000 tiny drums. I navigated through the slippery roads, the dashboard lights reflecting off the puddles that mirrored the stormy sky. As I approached the designated location, the streetlights flickered ominously, their halos distorted by the rain. The cemetery loomed ahead, its wrought iron gates rusted and barely holding against the tempest. I pulled up to the curb, the engine humming softly as I waited for my passenger. Moments later, a figure emerged from the darkness, her presence almost ethereal against the harsh backdrop of the storm. She was a woman, dressed in a pristine white sari that clung to her form, the fabric heavy with raindrops. Her hair was slicked back, revealing a face pale and serene, eyes wide and hauntingly empty. "Madam, you're here for the cemetery drop-off?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly despite my attempts to mask my unease. She nodded, her movements graceful yet unnervingly still. There was an air of melancholy about her, a silent sorrow that seemed to emanate from her very being. I opened the back door, and she slid into the seat with a fluidity that was almost supernatural. The warmth of the car contrasted sharply with the cold dampness outside, enveloping her in a cocoon of unsettling calm. "Please," she whispered, her voice soft yet piercing, "take me to Shivaji Park Cemetery." I pulled away from the curb, the tires screeching against the slick asphalt as I navigated the narrow roads leading deeper into the city's forgotten fringes. The cemetery was a sprawling expanse of tombstones and mausoleums, shrouded in shadows and the heavy mist that rose from the ground. As we approached, the woman remained silent, her eyes fixed on the distant figures of graves and monuments. I parked at the end of a winding path, the car's headlights cutting through the darkness to illuminate our destination. She stood up gracefully, the sari flowing around her like liquid moonlight, and stepped out into the rain-soaked night. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice fading into the storm as she walked towards her final resting place. I watched her disappear into the darkness, the image of her haunting serenity seared into my memory. Feeling a sense of unease, I turned back to the car to collect my fare, but the back seat was empty. The rain had washed away any sign of her presence. leaving the seats damp and cold as if she had never been there. Confused, I glanced around the desolate cemetery, the silence oppressive and heavy. Puzzled, I started the engine, ready to leave, when a local vendor approached me, drenched and shivering from the storm. "You were here last night," he said, his voice trembling. "You picked up the woman in white." I nodded, the memory flooding back. "Yes, I did." "Why?" The vendor looked around cautiously before leaning in closer, his eyes darting towards the darkened corners of the cemetery. "She wasn't alone," he whispered. "There was another figure, an older man, dressed in traditional attire. They say the woman in white is the spirit of Mira Desai, a woman who died tragically here years ago. The man is her husband, or so the legends say." My heart raced as I processed his words. Mira Desai. The name stirred something deep within me, a fragment of a story I couldn't quite place. The legend spoke of a woman who had vanished on a stormy night, her disappearance leaving her family in despair and the community whispering tales of the supernatural. As the vendor walked away, I felt a chill settle over me, the memory of that night resurfacing with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone to look up the history of Shivaji Park Cemetery. The records were sparse, but there it was, Mira Desai, listed as deceased in 2008. Her cause of death listed as unknown. The realization hit me hard. The woman I had driven home wasn't just a figment of my imagination or a trick of the storm. It was a spirit, trapped between worlds, seeking solace or perhaps closure. Determined to understand what had happened, I decided to return to the cemetery the following night, hoping to uncover the truth behind Mira Desai's tragic story. The next night, armed with a flashlight and a renewed sense of purpose, I navigated back to the abandoned gates, the rain still falling in relentless sheets. As I stepped into the cemetery, the atmosphere was thick with an eerie stillness. The tombstones loomed like silent sentinels, their inscriptions weathered and worn. I walked along the familiar path, my footsteps muffled by the rain-soaked earth, searching for any sign of the spirit I had encountered. Hours passed with nothing but the sound of the storm, until I reached the mausoleum where the vendor had indicated the figures had appeared. The structure stood grand yet somber, its gates slightly ajar. I pushed them open, the hinges creaking in protest, and entered the dimly lit hall. Inside, the air was cold and heavy, the scent of damp stone and forgotten memories hanging in the air. I approached the central tomb, where an ornate plaque commemorated Mira Desai and her husband, Arjun. The names were etched in elegant script, their love story captured in stone. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the frigid air. The room seemed to darken, shadows lengthening and twisting around me. A soft whisper echoed through the hall, barely audible over the storm outside. "Help me!" I turned, shining my flashlight towards the source of the voice, but saw nothing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of her, the woman in white standing near the tomb, her eyes filled with sorrow and longing. Behind her, the figure of a man loomed, his presence imposing yet mournful. "Mira," I called out, my voice trembling. She turned towards me, her expression a mix of pain and hope. "You saw me." I stepped closer, the reality of the situation sinking in. "Yes, I did. I want to help you." Tears welled up in her eyes as she reached out, her hand passing through mine like mist. "Arjun. He's been waiting for me. We were torn apart by the storm that took your father too. Couldn't leave him. Couldn't move on." The man stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Mira. "We're trapped here, unable to find peace. The storm that took her was the same that took so many lives, including ours. If someone could help us remember, help us tell our story, we might find the closure we need." Determined to aid these lost souls, I vowed to uncover the truth behind their tragic fate. Over the following weeks, I delved into old records, interviewing locals and piecing together the fragmented history of Mira and Arjun. The story that emerged was one of love and loss, of a night when the storm raged with unnatural fury, claiming lives and tearing families apart. The night of their disappearance. Mira and Arjun had been returning home after a family gathering. The storm had hit suddenly, fierce and unrelenting, making their journey treacherous. Their car had been swept away by a flash flood, their fate sealed by the wrath of nature. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the cemetery, the spirits of Mira and Arjun now clear in my mind. I spoke to them, relaying the information I had uncovered, my voice steady despite the fear that lingered. Mira, Arjun, I found out what happened. The storm, it took you away, but your love binds you together. It's time to let go, to find peace. The air shifted, a sense of calm washing over the mausoleum. Mira's form began to glow, the sorrow in her eyes softening as Arjun reached out to her. Together, they stepped towards each other, the pain of their loss slowly fading as the storm outside subsided. A brilliant light filled the room, enveloping them in its warmth. "Thank you," Mira whispered, her voice now filled with peace. "We can finally rest." As the light dimmed, their figures vanished, leaving behind a serene stillness that had been absent for years. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of closure and tranquility. I left the cemetery that night with a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that I had played a part in helping two lost souls find their way home. The storm had not only tested my courage but also reminded me of the thin veil between the living and the dead, a boundary that can be crossed in moments of tragedy and love. Years have passed since that transformative night, and the Whitaker House story remains a part of our town's lore. But my experience with Mira and Arjun stays with me, a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the mysteries that lie hidden in the shadows of the storm. Sometimes, when the rain begins to fall and the wind carries whispers through the trees, I feel a connection to those spirits, an unspoken bond that transcends life and death. It serves as a reminder that every soul has a story, and sometimes, it takes a little kindness and understanding to help them find their way. Story number 5. The White Umbrella. The rain had been relentless all evening, a torrential downpour that seemed to wash the city clean of its grime and worries. I'd always found solace in walking home after a long day, letting the rhythm of my footsteps sync with the patter of rain against the pavement. There was something almost therapeutic about it, a way to unwind and collect my thoughts before stepping into the warmth of my apartment. But tonight felt different, charged with an unspoken tension that made each step feel heavier than the last. It was nearing midnight when I decided to take a shortcut through the quieter side streets, away from the bustling main roads. The city lights blurred into streaks of yellow and white as the rain intensified, turning the sidewalks into mirrors reflecting the stormy sky above. My mind wandered as I walked, replaying the day's events and planning for tomorrow, when suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted her. She stood under a flickering street lamp, a solitary figure drenched in rain, clutching a pristine white umbrella. Her sari was soaked, clinging to her form, and her long hair cascaded down her back in dark, tangled waves. There was something hauntingly beautiful about her presence, a spectral grace that made her seem almost otherworldly against the harshness of the storm. "Madam, let me help you with that umbrella," I called out, my voice wavering between concern and hesitation. It wasn't often I encountered strangers out in this weather, especially not someone as striking as her. She turned to face me, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. They were deep and sorrowful, pools of darkness that seemed to hold untold stories and hidden pain. Without a word, she shook her head and turned back to the rain, her movements fluid and deliberate. "I appreciate your kindness, but I must continue on my way," she replied softly, her voice barely audible over the storm's fury. I felt an inexplicable urge to stay, to offer more help, but something about her presence kept me rooted to the spot. Instead, I nodded and continued my walk, the image of the woman with the white umbrella lingering in my mind like a haunting melody. As I walked further down the street, the rain began to ease, the heavy drops giving way to a lighter drizzle. The city seemed to exhale, the storm's rage subsiding into a gentle patter. It was then that I realized she was following me, her figure slowly emerging from the shadows behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced over my shoulder. But she remained a silent specter, her eyes never leaving mine. "Please, stop," I whispered, a mixture of fear and confusion gripping me. "Why are you following me?" She didn't respond. Instead, she continued to walk alongside me, her presence both comforting and unsettling. The streets were deserted. The only sound the soft rhythm of rain on my umbrella and the distant hum of the city settling down for the night. We walked in silence, the miles stretching out before us, until we reached my apartment building. I turned to face her, desperate for some explanation, but she simply nodded and stepped forward, her figure beginning to fade into the misty night. Before I could reach out to her, she vanished, leaving behind nothing but the lingering scent of rain and a sense of profound loss. Shaken, I entered my building and made my way to my apartment, trying to shake off the eerie encounter. As I settled into bed, the events of the night replayed in my mind, each detail sharpening with each passing second. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of birds chirping and the sun breaking through the remnants of the storm. Still groggy from sleep, I stretched and glanced around my room, only to notice something odd. The back seat of my car was soaked, the upholstery drenched as if someone had been sitting there. My mind raced. Did I leave my umbrella at the corner where I met her? Or had someone else been in my car? Confused, I headed out to the parking lot, the sun now fully shining, drying the remnants of the rain. As I approached my vehicle, a chill ran down my spine. There, neatly folded and placed on the back seat, was the same pristine white umbrella she had held the night before. My hands trembled as I reached for it, the memory of her sorrowful eyes flashing through my mind. Determined to find answers, I decided to ask around. I stopped by a local cafe, hoping to find someone who might have seen the woman with the white umbrella. The owner, a middle-aged man named Haruki, greeted me with a warm smile. "Morning, Raj. What brings you here so early?" he asked, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I had an unusual encounter last night," I began, recounting the events as best as I could. "A woman with a white umbrella. She refused my help and then followed me home." Haruki listened intently, his expression turning thoughtful. "I've heard stories about that area. They say the old Kamada house is haunted by the spirit of a woman who lost her life in a tragic accident during a storm. Many years ago, she's often seen with a white umbrella, trying to find her way home." My blood ran cold. "Do you think it could have been her?" He nodded solemnly. "It's possible. Many people claim to have seen her during heavy rains. They say she's searching for someone or something, unable to move on, determined to uncover the truth." I decided to visit the Kamada house, now an abandoned and decrepit building on the outskirts of town. The stories surrounding it were numerous, ranging from tragic love stories to mysterious disappearances, but none of them quite matched what I had experienced. As I approached the house, the sky darkened once more, clouds gathering ominously as if echoing the storm of my own emotions. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, the gravel crunching under my shoes. The house loomed before me, its windows shattered and walls covered in ivy, the remnants of its former grandeur now swallowed by decay. I stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of mold and broken memories. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the broken furniture and remnants of lives long gone. As I made my way through the house, the silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water and the occasional gust of wind rattling the shutters. Upstairs, I found myself in what once must have been the master bedroom. The room was eerily intact, the bed still neatly made despite the years of abandonment. As I examined the space, my eyes were drawn to a dusty mirror hanging on the wall. It reflected my image back at me. But something was off. My reflection seemed distant, almost hollow. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, and the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. The room grew colder, the shadows deepening, and the atmosphere thick with an unspoken sorrow. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her standing in the doorway, the woman with the white umbrella. Her eyes met mine, filled with an anguish that pierced through me. She began to move towards me, each step deliberate and slow, the umbrella clutched tightly in her hands. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing through the room like a ghostly plea. I reached out, desperate to touch her, but my hand passed through her form as if she were made of mist. Panic surged through me as she continued to approach, her presence overwhelming and suffocating. "Please, let me help you," I begged, tears welling up in my eyes. "What do you need?" She stopped in front of me, her eyes never leaving mine. "I can't find my way home," she murmured, her voice filled with sorrow. "I'm lost." Determined to help, I guided her towards the door, but as I reached out to steady her, she began to fade, her form dissolving into the air like smoke. The temperature in the room rose sharply, the oppressive sadness lifting as she disappeared. I stood there, breathless and shaken, the rain still pouring outside as I left the Kamada house. The encounter left me with more questions than answers, a lingering sense of responsibility to help the lost spirit find peace. Over the following weeks, I delved into the history of the Kamada house, uncovering the tragic story of Mira Kamada, a young woman who had lost her life in a storm while trying to save her family. Her spirit had been trapped, unable to move on, endlessly searching for a way back home. Determined to help her find peace, I organized a memorial at the site of her last moments, inviting locals to honor her memory and lay to rest the sorrow that had bound her to the physical world. The night of the memorial, the sky was clear, the stars shining brightly as if in acknowledgement of our efforts. As we lit candles and placed flowers around the area, a sense of calm settled over the crowd. I stood in the center, holding a single white umbrella as a symbol of Mira's presence and our commitment to helping her move on. "Mira," I called out softly, my voice steady despite the emotional weight. "We honor your memory and help you find your way home." A gentle breeze swept through the area, and I felt a presence beside me. I looked up to see Mira standing there, her eyes filled with gratitude and peace. She smiled, a serene expression that spoke of her release from the torment that had held her captive for so long. With a final nod, she stepped forward, her form brightening until she was bathed in a soft, white light. The white umbrella glowed brightly before fading away, leaving behind a profound sense of closure and tranquility. As I watched her disappear into the night, the rain ceased, and the storm clouds parted, revealing a clear sky. The memory of that night lingered, a testament to the power of compassion and the belief that even in the darkest of storms, there is hope for redemption and peace. Sometimes, when the rain begins to fall and the city lights shimmer on the wet pavement, I catch a glimpse of a white umbrella passing by my window, a silent reminder that some souls find their way home, guided by kindness and the unwavering human spirit. Story number 6. The Man in the Rain. The night had been growing restless for hours, the clouds thick with an impending storm that promised to unleash its fury at any moment. My wife, Maya, and I were driving home from a late dinner, our car slicing through the deserted roads of the rural outskirts, the kind of place where headlights rarely penetrated the darkness, and the silence was only broken by the distant rumble of thunder. We had taken this route countless times, a shortcut through the dense woods that cut our journey by nearly half an hour. Tonight, however, something felt off. The air was heavy, laden with the scent of wet earth and the electric charge that precedes a downpour. Maya glanced over at me, her eyes reflecting a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Do you ever wonder what's out there?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the increasing wind. I chuckled nervously, trying to dispel the unease settling over me. All the time. But then I remember we have a roof over our heads and good old-fashioned headlights. Before she could respond, a flash of lightning illuminated the road ahead, revealing a solitary figure standing in the middle of the asphalt. He was drenched, his dark clothing plastered to his frame, and an old, battered umbrella clutched tightly in his hand. For a moment, he seemed to be waiting, his gaze fixed on something beyond our immediate sight. "Should we stop?" Maya whispered, her grip on the steering wheel tightening. I glanced at her, weighing the options. On one hand, helping someone in need was instinctive. On the other, the isolation of this stretch of road made me wary. "Let's slow down. See if he needs anything," I decided, turning off the main road and approaching cautiously. As we drew nearer, the man didn't move. Instead, he raised his hand in a silent gesture, a plea for help that transcended words. Maya and I exchanged a glance, the decision hanging heavy between us. Finally, I pulled over, the tires squealing softly against the slick pavement. Rolling down my window, I called out, "Hey there, do you need a ride somewhere?" The man remained silent, his expression unreadable. Maya rolled down her window as well, but she too received no response. An uncomfortable tension filled the air, thickening with each passing second. "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping out of the car to approach him. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and began to walk along the roadside, his steps slow and deliberate. Maya and I watched as he distanced himself, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Without thinking, I hesitated before deciding to follow, driven by a mix of concern and curiosity. We drove slowly, the car's headlights cutting through the thick canopy of trees. The rain began to pour in earnest, drumming against the roof and windshield. The storm now fully unleashed. The road twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the heart of the wilderness. After what felt like an eternity, we found ourselves on a narrow, unmarked path that led to a clearing. In the center stood an old, abandoned cabin, its windows boarded up and the door hanging loosely from its hinges. The man was nowhere to be seen. "Should we go in?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head, uneasy about disturbing what felt like a sacred space. "Maybe he's just passing through. Let's head back." As we turned to leave, a flash of lightning illuminated the cabin once more. And there he was, the man in the white sari, standing just inside the doorway. His eyes met mine, and for a split second, I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and desperation emanating from him. "Please, help me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm's roar. I reached out, but my hand passed through him as if he were made of mist. Maya and I stood frozen, the reality of the situation sinking in. He wasn't a man in need of help. He was something else entirely, a spectral presence bound to this forsaken place. Before I could process what was happening, the cabin door slammed shut with a force that sent vibrations through the ground. The man vanished, leaving behind only the lingering echo of his plea and the oppressive silence that followed. Panic surged through me as Maya and I scrambled back to the car, the storm now a raging tempest around us. We sped away from the cabin, the road seeming to stretch on endlessly as the rain battered against the windows. The sense of being watched never left us, the memory of the man's sorrowful eyes haunting our every mile. Back in the safety of our home, the storm finally began to subside, the rain tapering off to a gentle drizzle. Yet, the unease remained, a lingering shadow that refused to dissipate. I couldn't shake the image of the man in the white sari, his silent plea echoing in my mind. Days turned into weeks, and life gradually returned to normal. But every time a storm rolled in, I couldn't help but wonder about that night, about the man who stood in the rain, trapped between worlds. Maya tried to reassure me, but she too was affected, the experience leaving a mark on her as well. One evening, as I was locking up for the night, I noticed a familiar figure standing outside my window, a woman in a white sari, her presence ghostly under the street lamp's glow. My heart raced as I approached, but as I reached out, she faded into the darkness, leaving behind only the faint scent of rain and the lingering echo of her silent sorrow. Determined to find answers, I delved into local legends and folklore, uncovering stories of spirits bound to the land, victims of tragic accidents, and souls unable to find peace. The man in the white sari was a recurring figure in these tales, a symbol of loss and longing that transcended time and place. One night, driven by a need for closure, I returned to the clearing where we had first encountered him. The cabin stood silent, his presence a stark reminder of the night's events. I sat in the rain-soaked grass, calling out to him softly, hoping to bridge the gap between our worlds. "Please," I whispered, "what do you need? How can I help you find peace?" For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the rain, a soothing rhythm that contrasted with the turmoil in my heart. Then, slowly, she appeared, no longer a man, but a woman in a white sari, her eyes filled with an eternal sorrow. "I lost my way," she murmured, her voice carrying the weight of countless nights spent wandering. "I can't move on until I find what I lost." Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached out, this time feeling a connection that transcended the physical realm. "Tell me what happened. Let me help you find peace." She began to recount her story, a tale of love and loss, of a night when a storm tore her family apart, leaving her trapped in a liminal space between life and death. Her husband had been lost to the tempest, his spirit unable to leave her side, forever searching for reunion in the endless rain. Determined to help, Maya and I worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragments of her past, reaching out to historians, and uncovering the forgotten details of her tragic night. We organized a memorial at the site, honoring her memory and the love that bound her to this world. On the night of the memorial, the rain fell gently, a soothing balm to the wounds of the past. As we lit candles and placed flowers around the clearing, the air felt lighter, the oppressive presence replaced by a serene calm. I stood in the center, holding the white umbrella she had left behind, a symbol of her enduring hope. "May you find peace," I called out softly, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling within me. "Your story is heard, your pain acknowledged." A gentle breeze swept through the clearing, and the woman in the white sari appeared once more, her eyes now filled with gratitude and peace. She smiled, a serene expression that spoke of release and acceptance. Before fading into the night, the white umbrella gliding gracefully behind her until it vanished into the darkness. As the storm clouds parted and the moon cast a gentle glow over the clearing, a profound sense of closure settled over us. The man, or rather, the woman, in the white sari had finally found her way home, her spirit free from the torment that had bound her for so long. Life returned to normal, the memory of that night etched into our hearts as a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring connection between the living and the dead. But sometimes, when a storm rolls in and the rain begins to fall, I catch a glimpse of a white umbrella dancing in the wind, a silent reminder that some souls find their peace, guided by kindness and understanding. Story number 7. The Face in the Mirror. I never believed in ghosts. To me, they were nothing more than stories told to scare children or explain the unexplainable. But that all changed on a night when the rain seemed to mirror the turmoil that would unfold in my own home. It was a typical monsoon evening. The sky darkened with heavy clouds, and the rain pounded relentlessly against the windows. My name is Lily Thompson, and I was alone in my small apartment, trying to finish some overdue work after a long day. The sounds of the storm outside created a hypnotic rhythm, making it easier to lose myself in my tasks. After hours of staring at the computer screen, I decided to take a break. I made my way to the bathroom, the flickering overhead light casting shadows that danced across the tiled floor. The mirror above the sink was slightly fogged from the humidity, a testament to the storm's intensity. As I began to wipe the condensation from the mirror, my mind wandered to thoughts of the past. of times when the storm had brought both chaos and calm to my life. It was during these moments of reflection that I first saw him. First, it was just a fleeting glimpse, a shadowy outline that lingered at the edge of my vision. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thought, telling myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, as I leaned closer to the mirror, the image became clearer. There, behind me in the reflection, stood a man. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face calm and composed, a faint smile playing on his lips. His eyes, so deep and penetrating, seemed to hold secrets that I couldn't fathom. My heart skipped a beat as I turned around. But there was no one there. The bathroom was empty. The only thing present was my own reflection staring back at me. I blinked, the residual shock fading, and chuckled nervously. "You're imagining things," I muttered to myself, though my voice lacked conviction. But the night was far from over. Moments later, as I was about to return to my work, I heard the unmistakable sound of water dripping. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but in the stillness of the storm, it stood out like a pinprick of reality. Confused, I checked every faucet and shut off each one, assuring myself that I hadn't left any running. The dripping continued, each drop a relentless reminder that something was amiss. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots between the ghostly apparition and the unexplained sounds. I decided to investigate further, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity that propelled me towards the heart of the mystery. I stood before the mirror once more, my reflection staring back at me. Taking a deep breath, I picked up a cloth and began to wipe away the last of the condensation. As I worked, the atmosphere in the bathroom shifted, the air growing colder, the shadows lengthening unnaturally. Suddenly, the man appeared again, more vivid than before. His smile widened, and his eyes seemed to bore into my soul. I felt an icy chill run down my spine, the fear gnawing at my composure. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice quivering. He took a step forward, and I instinctively backed away, the mirror now reflecting the tension between us. "Why are you here?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. His smile faltered, replaced by a look of sadness. "I can't move on," he whispered, his voice echoing through the bathroom. "I need your help." Confusion clouded my thoughts. "How? What do you need me to do?" He reached out towards me, his hand passing through the glass as if it were made of mist. "Find the truth," he insisted. "Help me find peace." Before I could respond, the room was plunged into darkness as the lights flickered and died. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone, the screen barely illuminating the space around me. The dripping of water grew louder, a symphony of haunting sounds that filled the void. I backed away from the mirror, my mind racing to make sense of the situation. The man had disappeared, leaving behind only the lingering sorrow in his eyes and the oppressive silence that now engulfed the bathroom. I felt a presence in the room, a weight that pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. Determined to uncover the truth behind his presence, I decided to delve into the history of my apartment building. A few blocks away stood an old, forgotten cemetery, its gates rusted and overgrown with ivy. The local legends spoke of spirits bound to the living, their unfinished business tethering them to the mortal realm. I spent the next few days researching, uncovering stories of lost souls and tragic fates. One story, in particular, caught my attention: a man named David Parker, who had died in a mysterious accident in the same building years ago. His death had been sudden, the details shrouded in secrecy, leading to whispers of foul play and supernatural involvement. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the apartment, the storm now a distant memory but the echoes of that night still fresh in my mind. I stood before the mirror, hoping to communicate with the spirit and offer the help he so desperately needed. "David," I called out softly, the name rolling off my tongue with a mixture of respect and empathy. "I'm here to help you. Tell me what happened." The room seemed to respond, the air growing warmer as the reflection in the mirror began to change. David's face, once sad and sorrowful, now held a glimmer of hope. "I was wronged," he said, his voice steady but filled with pain. "I couldn't let go until the truth was revealed." I felt a surge of determination, my fear replaced by a resolve to uncover the mystery of his untimely death. With David's guidance, I pieced together the fragmented history of the building, uncovering hidden documents and old newspaper clippings that painted a picture of deceit and betrayal. It turned out that David had been a prominent figure in the community, a man admired by many but harboring secrets that could destroy reputations and lives. On the night of his death, he had confronted someone who threatened to expose the truth, leading to a heated argument that spiraled out of control. The details were murky, the evidence inconclusive, but the story suggested a deliberate act of violence that had left David's spirit restless and searching for closure. Armed with this information, I confronted those who had known David, unearthing buried grudges and hidden animosities that had festered in the shadows of the building. Slowly, the pieces began to fit together, the truth emerging from the darkness like a beacon of light. Finally, I presented the evidence to the local authorities, ensuring that David's story was heard and his name cleared. As the truth came to light, the oppressive presence in my apartment lifted, the mirror once again reflecting only my own image. A sense of peace settled over me, the haunting sorrow that had plagued my nights finally finding its rest. I knew that David Parker could now move on, his spirit free from the chains of unfinished business. But sometimes, when the storm clouds gather and the rain begins to fall, I catch a glimpse of a shadow in the mirror, an ethereal reminder that some stories linger, waiting to be heard and resolved. And I remember that night when a face in the rain taught me to seek the truth, to listen to the whispers of the past, and to honor the spirits that walk among us in the storm's embrace.